Today we're going to cover what is a basic home inspection. When you hire a home inspector to come out and look at your house, whether you are the realtor or a first-time home buyer, or whether you're going to be putting your home on the market to sell, this video is especially for you. And there's a process that the home inspector goes through to inspect your home. And we're going to be going through the basic sessions of a home inspection so you can understand that process more fully and that you can really prepare your house for sale, or you can prepare yourself to make that offer on your new house. The foundation system, we're going to be looking at how the foundation was poured, whether there's any cracks, settlement, or the general situation of the foundation, and how it connects to the floor framing system. The floor framing system is the area underneath the floor that you're walking on. So we're going to be looking at all the wood under there and how it's attached together to understand if there's any kind of cracks, any kind of damage, any kind of moisture coming up from the bottom, and making sure that this framing system is solid. Underneath the floor there's typically at least a foot or possibly 2 feet, and in some situations more area, that air is supposed to travel in order to keep moisture out of that area. If there's too much moisture under there, it can cause damage to the floor framing system and damage to the foundation system itself sometimes. So we're going to be taking a look at the vents and making sure that the ventilation coming through underneath your floor framing system is adequate to keep that area moisture free. The cement foundation is going to be attached to your house, so we're going to be looking at the anchoring system, how it's attached, if there's anything missing, anything that's visibly damaged, and how the wall is braced itself coming up from the concrete foundation. The main point we're going to be looking for is any kind of damage or anything out of the ordinary that we might have to call in an expert to take further evaluation of. There should be no contact between soil and wood under the house. If there's any kind of wood supports coming down from the floor framing system, they should be going onto some kind of cement foundation or cement support. There should be no direct connection from wood to soil. In many homes, underneath the floor framing system, there is insulation that is keeping the floor insulated and helping the overall insulation of the house. The main thing that we're going to be looking for is to make sure that this insulation hasn't fallen down and come into contact with the ground beneath to wick up any kind of moisture. In the subfloor area of the house, we want to take a look at the wood supports that come down from the floor to make sure there's no kind of earth-to-ground contact. Also to make sure to look at the footings to go deep enough. In this case, there's a little bit of a debris underneath the house, but it looks pretty good. We'll also be looking for any kind of moisture issues underneath the house and the drainage. Also, when we're looking at the concrete walls of the foundation, we're going to be looking for any kind of major cracks. A lot of times in older houses there will be typical cracks which aren't such an issue, but we'll be looking for any kind of major foundation cracks. We'll be looking at the pipes underneath to see how the pipes are supported. In the case of drain pipes, we'll be checking to see if there's any kind of straps that are not connected properly, and making sure that there's no cracks in the drain pipes. The vents on the outside of the house, we're going to be looking to make sure there's no kind of holes in the vents that any kind of birds can get into, or rats or small animals. Also, we're going to be checking the kind of vents that are there. Sometimes people put the louver vents that block the air. So really the only type of acceptable vent is a wire type vent that lets the air come in and out freely. This is a good example of vent wire for the venting on the side of the house for the subfloor area, but there's definitely holes in here that needs to be replaced. The home inspector is going to be looking at the surface grade directly adjacent to the building to make sure that there's sufficient grading for runoff of water. So we're going to be checking the doors to make sure they open and close, to make sure that there's no rubbing or sticking, and also the same situation for the windows, to make sure that the windows open and close correctly. There's no broken windows. So we're going to be looking at the decks to see if there's any kind of loose railing, if there's any kind of trip hazard walking up and down the decks. The stairways also we're going to be checking to make sure that the rise and run is correct, and also if there's any kind of enclosure, we're going to make sure that there's no kind of problem from the enclosure falling down. We're going to be taking a look at each wall, taking a look around the outside of the house to see if there's any kind of damage and to see if there's any kind of possibility for water intrusion. We're going to be looking at the trim to make sure that the trim is connected correctly to the windows and to see if any kind of caulking is needed or any kind of further repair or maintenance is needed. We're just going to be looking down at our feet and making sure there's nothing we're going to trip over, make sure there's no kind of cracks or damage, and make sure that the water runoff is correct on the walkways and the driveways. I'm also going to check the sprinklers to make sure they're working correctly and that they're not causing any kind of moisture damage on the house. Now we're going to check the water pressure. That looks good. Also, we're going to take a look at the grade to make sure that it slopes away from the house and there's no kind of drainage issues. As we walk around the outside of the house, we're going to take a look at the windows from the outside, make sure there's no broken glass or broken seals, making sure that there's no caulking needed and they're installed correctly. As I'm walking around the house, I'm taking a look at the stucco. In this case, I'm looking at the gutter and the drain to make sure that it's installed correctly. I'm taking a look at the front door, looking at everything externally, checking the windows, see if they're broken, checking again all the gutters, looking underneath the eaves to see if there's any kind of damage. In this case, there's a vent here, making sure that the vent is put in correctly and that there's no kind of holes for any kind of mice or birds to go in there. As I walk around the outside of the house, I'm going to be checking any of the electrical fixtures, making sure there's no exposed wiring. Sometimes people put an electrical cord in here for Christmas tree lights. I'm just going to make sure everything's done correctly. Be checking the eaves under here, make sure there's no damage I need to look at later when I'm in the attic. The garage door, I'm going to make sure it seals correctly here. Once again, keep my eye out for any kind of stucco damage. Sometimes on wood houses on the outside, there's a gap above here that I need to check to make sure no water entry is happening there. Just doing a quick visual on the outside, making sure there's no damage to the driveway area. I continue walking around to look at the outside. I already checked the gate, checking to make sure the gutters look correct, checking this electrical light again. The door looks all correct. Checking around the outside of the door. In this case, it's stucco, looking for any kind of major cracking in the stucco. I'm checking underneath the eaves. There's venting here on this side that looks good. I'm also checking the concrete here, checking the drainage, how it drains away from the house. I'm going to walk around the outside and take a look at the fence. I'm going to take a look at the post to make sure there's no loose or rotted post, make sure there's no missing boards, and then I'll write in the inspection report the general condition of the fence. As I walk around, I'm going to be looking at the eaves, looking at the vents to make sure there's no kind of broken or missing vents, taking a look at the lamp out here, checking the sliding glass door to make sure it works correctly, looking around the outside of the door to make sure there's no kind of caulking issue, checking any water outlets. We have an electrical outlet here I'm going to be checking to make sure it works correctly and it's not loose. Doing a visual of the concrete, looking for the drainage also, taking a look at the windows, just basically walking around giving a good visual of it.